Welcome to the LB's The Lover of Books author chat. Now to introduce this iconic New York Times bestselling novelist. Alice Elliott Dark is the author of the novel Fellowship Point and Think of England, and two collections of short stories in the Gloaming and Naked Up to the Waist. Her work has appeared in, among others, The New Yorker, Harper's, Double Take, Plowshares, A Public Space, Best American Short Stories, Prize Stories, the O. Henry Awards, and has been translated into many languages. In the Gloaming, a story was chosen by John Updike for inclusion in the Best American Short Stories of the Century and was made into films by HBO and Trinity Playhouse. Her nonfiction reviews and essays have appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and many anthologies. She is the recipient of fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts and an associate professor at Rutgers at Newark in the English department and the MFA program. Let's welcome Alice here tonight. Thank you so much for coming. We're so excited to chat with you.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here and see everybody.
Yeah, we're just so excited. I'm going to go ahead and let the LA Times describe this masterpiece, if that's okay, because I thought it was really well described. Quote, longing for an old-fashioned 19th century novel, but without the time travel, Fellowship Point earns its nearly 600 pages with a quietly complex structure, starring two octogenarian women whose long friendship is entangled with their family's landholdings in coastal Maine. As they seek to save the acreage from development, Agnes Lee and Polly Wister must also confront their past choices and find some peace in the present. I love that description. When you describe it, is it close to that, or is there anything else that you like to include when you're giving a short little blip?
I think that is a really, succinct, good description.
Awesome. All right, let's just go ahead and start. Where did you start with this book? What was the seed? What was the thing that got it going?
I actually started with the character of Virgil, and he just came into my imagination, and I started writing about him. And then as I was writing about him, he ended up going to Maine. And then when we were in Maine, all of a sudden the other characters started coming into my imagination. Polly, Robert, and then finally Agnes was the last one. And then she was the last one. And then, actually a little bit after her was Maud, but Agnes and then Maud. But yes, I wrote a whole draft of the book that was just Polly and Robert, really. And Agnes was in it, but she was off to the side. And it wasn't the book I wanted to write, but I got to know those characters really well. When I put Agnes in it more, the whole book blew up and got bigger.
So when did this Virgil idea begin? When was this? What year?
This was in 2011.
Okay.
I was at an arts residency in Virginia, and I had been trying to work on a book for a really long time, and I just could not figure it out. And I had a day when I just decided, okay, I quit. I'm sure we've all had those days when it's just like, okay, I can't figure this out. I can't do it. It's not going to happen. So I just sat in the chair. I sat in the chair. I looked out the window, and after about 5 hours of doing that, I know it sounds long, but you can just lose track of time under those circumstances. And then I just started thinking about this person, Virgil, and I knew that I had found something in my imagination. So I just started, I went from my chair to my desk and just started writing about him. And, it went from there.
So this is 2011.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us how it evolved. You're getting characters. Is this something that spanned over how much, has it gone up until 10 years or,
No, I think but after 3 years, I had the characters and I had an idea for the plot. I knew I wanted it to be like a 19th century novel. And then at a certain point, I decided it's going to be a land plot, except the landowners are going to be women instead of men. And that was a very exciting idea to me, because I have read a lot of those 19th century novels, and it really is, the inheritance plots are all about men. And
Yeah.
this, I thought, could be something different. I did a lot of research about women landowners in the United States, and I found interesting things I didn't know about how many women had given land to national parks, how many women had started land trusts. There was like an enormous history of women giving their land away. So Agnes's idea of wanting to put her land into a trust had a lot of precedent, but also quiet precedent, because we don't know these stories.
True. What do you mean by you wanted to write a 19th century novel? What does that mean to you, and what did you want to put out there?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, my idea to do it really came from watching a miniseries called He Knew He Was Right by Anthony Trollope. And I remembered how much I love Dickens, books like Middlemarch, Tolstoy, these big books with plots and subplots and twists and turns, and just lots and lots of event, and certain kinds of events. Like I think most of you have read the book, yes or no?
Yes, everybody's nodding.
Okay, everybody's nodding. So I wanted to have like a big coincidence or reveal in the book. I knew I wanted that to happen. It took me a while to figure out how it happened, but that was something I always loved so much when I was young. When I get to a place like that, like, oh my God, that he's that person. I can't, I wanted to do something like that. So I did do something like that. But that's what I mean. It's like a certain kind of novel that has a feeling of a place, a community, and things happening in the community, and a very small cast of characters, but that seems like a much bigger cast of characters because of the sense of place. I think a lot of those books do that. They convince you they're writing about a huge part of the world, but like Middlemarch is a perfect example. It's a small town, but even within the small town, you're only looking at about 15 people.
So was this idea daunting? Was it challenging? Was it, I mean, is it like a growth mindset of, I can't wait to take this on? Or is it, oh my gosh, what am I taking on here?
It was a little bit of, what am I taking on here? I mean, I was a poet until I was 30. I never had ambitions to write like a big book like this. So I decided I wanted to do it before I stepped back and thought, am I going to be able to do this? Because, it was like a huge undertaking. It took me a while, but I think that I went into it thinking I really want to learn how to do a subplot, like one that resolves the plot, which is what happens in those kind of books. And I don't see a lot of contemporary novels doing that in the way that 19th century novels did it. They're just so good at this plotting, and I love good plots. So I went at it a little bit at a time. I didn't try to do everything at once. I kind of wrote my way through it, but at a certain point, I pulled back and figured out if everything was making sense.
So what did you do? Because you mentioned you had to do research on this. So how, one, you're kind of researching how to write this kind of novel. And two, you have to research what's happening over almost, a century. Well, really, it was over a century because of when Virgil's story. So what did you do to prepare yourself?
I went at it pretty much as I went along. I didn't really do a lot of preparation ahead of time. I would get to a certain point and I'd say, oh, Agnes and Polly are Quakers. So how about that? So I better do some research about Quakers. And I knew a lot just because I grew up outside of Philadelphia, and there's a very Quaker ethos in that city. But I wanted to know more and to make sure I got certain things accurate. And the different parts of the book, the names of the different parts of the book are from the Quaker discernment process, which I really liked, and I wanted to make sure that the plot in those parts of the books matched that aspect of a discernment process. And things would happen like, okay, they want to give it to a land trust. How does the land trust work? How does it work in Maine? What are the different options they would have? That sort of thing. But I didn't do it really ahead of time. I did it as needed.
So you research as you go. Do you like that part of the process, or do you enjoy more of the writing part?
The research is fun, and you go down rabbit holes. I mean, I would end up reading about stuff that was so far away from anything I would ever need. But it's just like going down a YouTube rabbit hole. You just follow one thing to the next, and it's very enjoyable. I would have to stop myself because I just didn't have time to do as much as I was drawn to.
Well, I wasn't sure of your Quaker connection, but I live just outside of Greensboro, North Carolina, which has a very strong hold of Quakers with the Friends School, and they set up Guilford College and whatnot, and the Underground Railroad. So all these things that you were mentioning, I was thinking, there's a little bit of nugget of that here. So yeah. It was fascinating. But why Maine? I mean, I know you said you grew up in Philadelphia, or had lived in Philadelphia for a part. So why did you choose Maine?
I have always gone to Maine in the summer. I went to camp in Maine for years, and then my mother moved to Maine in the 1970s, and I spent a lot of time there. And I love Maine, and it's beautiful. And I just wanted to write about how much I love Maine.
You sound very Agnes-like. Are there some similarities there?
It's funny. I don't think so. I wish. I mean, I gave her the writing life that I would like to have, 5 hours a day, having kind of the day to herself, having enough money not to, I mean, I have a pretty heavy job. I would love to have just that kind of freedom to work. Of course, she did have to work. She found out when she was 40 that unless she made money, she was going to lose the point. So her children's book practice made her the money that she needed. But I'm actually very meek. Like, I'll give you an example. When I was writing the book, and the parts when Maud and Agnes were writing letters back and forth to each other, and Maud was being so assertive with Agnes, and it would make me so nervous. I would literally jump up from the desk. I'd be like, she's 26 years old. How can she be writing so assertively? So no, I'm not. I always thought I would be when I got, maybe when I turn 80, I'll be like that, because I always thought the fun of being an old woman is you get to be like Agnes, but it hasn't happened for me yet.
Well, what if your writing style and writing habits aren't like Agnes? What are they like?
Well, it depends on how much time I have. During this semesters, I have very little time to work on my own. So I work a little on the weekends, and I try to write a little bit every morning. Okay. But when I have time, like, for example, I'm about to go to a writing residency in May for 5 weeks, then I only have to do, I have to go into dinner at 6:30, but otherwise I have 23 hours a day to myself if I want them. And that's ideal for me. I get a lot done under those circumstances. And it's not that I write every minute. I'm very distractible, and I'll jump up or I'll open a book or something, but just not having to take my mind out of the book is really productive.
Well, you did say, and it was kind of interesting because, you have a writer as your narrator for a lot of the book. So you said the author leads readers where to go. So if that's the case, is that one of your beliefs? And if so, where did you want to take us in this novel?
I love that question. I wanted to talk about how people change. And I knew I wanted Agnes and Polly both to come to some kind of realization or some kind of change by the end of the book. But it seemed to me that to really convince people that someone's actually changing, because we all know how hard it is to change. It's very difficult. That I needed a lot of scenes and a lot of events to show them, to push them forward and to sort of push them in a place where they were going to change. So that was one of the things I wanted to talk about. Another thing I wanted to talk about was old women, because I've always loved old women, and since I was little, and find them very interesting. And I don't know, I've always been saddened also by the kind of marginalization of all old people, but women even more than men. I think, maybe not. Maybe men would disagree with that, but just, you go to a party or something, you go to a public situation and you just see sort of older women, like no one's eager to go over and talk to them. Nobody really understands what they have left to offer, or that they're still in the middle of their lives as far as they're concerned. People know, we all know how old we are, but we are all in our life every day, and that doesn't change as you get old. So I wanted to show women who are still vital and who are changing and thinking and growing, and just the same as they were when they were young.
I agree. Tracy agrees in the chat box. She says, I love reading about older people. They're so interesting, so much history, and can be hilarious too. So
yes,
I think you tapped into an audience that was ready for it.
It seems that way, because I've gotten so many letters or emails, I should say, from women in their between, like, say 70 and 90, who just feel very seen by these characters.
Well, you did choose to span this novel over a lot of time. So you could, capture not just where they are in life now, but where they've been. What character do you believe showed the most change, and why?
I really felt like Polly changed the most. She was living a life of wife and mother, and she was doing that very with a lot of integrity and interest, and she wanted that. That was what she wanted. But after Dick died, and she was able to start making her own choices and having a little more time to think about what she wanted to do, she really started to change. And she was even able to finally have some thoughts about him that weren't that weren't completely behind the screen of loyalty, because she had decided when she was young that she was not going to question her marriage. There was that one scene when she goes to the party with the other young women, and she sees that other woman start saying, I don't even understand who I married. This guy is so weird. It's so unfamiliar to me. And she's a little tempted by that. She's like, yeah, I mean, it's not exactly how I expected it. But that day she decides, I don't want to be like that woman. I don't want to ask myself these questions. I don't want to question my marriage. I want to just live my life. But then after he dies, she gives herself the opportunity to think about some things that she didn't before. And then she takes some strong actions later in the book.
I think all along she never allowed herself to act on it, but it's not like the thoughts didn't happen. And she almost had Agnes's voice in her head all along, because she would say things like, nope, not listening to Agnes now. I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. And so it almost let her build up to that moment, because if she'd never had those thoughts or never even considered a change, I don't know that we would have seen that growth. So having that inner dialogue was super helpful for the reader to make it so believable.
I think that's so true. I think having a friendship the way they had a friendship, living such very different lives, they held a lot of space for each other for things like that. The fact that Agnes was constantly making fun of Dick and teasing her about Dick, gave her a chance to experience those feelings without having to fully be the only one who, fully being the one who did it. And I think that was really good for Polly. I think you're right. She was able to go through those thoughts without feeling like she was violating anything that she didn't want to violate. And the same for Agnes. I think having a friend like Polly, who was so steadfast in so many ways, helped her with her own routines and things that she wanted to be, that she wanted to be loyal to in her life.
Yeah, I think her positivity, her sense of family, her sense of community did help, with Agnes's outlook, but also because they were friends for so long. I mean, they knew the ins and outs of every facial expression, every tone of voice, anything off, they knew. And I thought that was an important tell for each of them because it kept them honest in a lot of ways.
I agree.
I really appreciated that friendship and that you took it into their 80s because it made it even more so. Can you talk about why you decided to have Agnes, one, not marry, two, had the chance to marry and break it off, and then not have children? Like, is it that you wanted the complete opposite of Polly, or what were your thoughts there?
It didn't really happen that way. I wasn't really planning everything until the very end, and I went back and made sure everything worked together, but I really just let Agnes unfold. And I think things could have gone differently. For example, with Virgil, I did write some scenes where they did get together. And I just felt like this is not really true to who this woman is. And it's not true to how things would go either. I mean, when Virgil was there and they were just pretty much alone for a couple of years in the winters, there was no one else around. So she kind of fell for him, but he was younger than she was by enough that he's going to fall for the younger woman in town. It's just was natural for that to happen that way.
Did Polly see it? Because she warned her. Did she know?
Yes, she could tell. She could tell. Yes, she saw it. She saw what kind of person he was, that he wasn't going to be the kind of guy who would do something like fall in love with the older woman. He was just going to be a regular guy.
Do you think Agnes had traits like Dick? At times they were very similar with how she treated Polly, even, in my opinion. Do you think that there are some similarities?
I think so. I think they both had big egos and they both had disappointments that they were defending around their disappointments. He had a huge disappointment in his career when he was young. So he was full of bluster. He never really made a big adaptation to trying to write on another subject deeply. He just was like, well, I wrote my great book and it was bad timing. And I had scenes of him that I didn't put in the book of him in the classroom. And he was a very good teacher, but he stayed too long. He overstayed. So then he started making mistakes. And I think Agnes also has a very, very strong sense of self and self-confidence to the point where she can be brusque and curt with people. It's not suffering fools. I think both of them had that in common.
I do think she was wittier and could read a room better, hence why the M girls adored her.
Yeah.
Whereas with Dick, I never got that impression that he had that sort of, could capture a room the way she could and get away.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think he was sort of an absent-minded professor type. Just, he was happy to go in his study, and the people that she liked, she loved, and they felt it. So like the M girls, yes, she can be with them, tease them, have fun with them, because she loves them.
I'm going to shift gears a little bit because you have lots of themes that you talk about. And one of the central themes is conservation and environmentalism. Why did you choose those topics for this book? Just tell us a little bit more.
Well, as I said, one of the ideas was about women being the landowners instead of men. But another part of it was just a lifelong sort of curiosity or lack of understanding, I could even put it, that about owning land. When I was a child, I very specifically had a moment when I saw we had a house at the shore. My grandparents had a house at the shore, and I was watching someone mow the lawn, and they stopped right in the middle. And I said to my grandfather, I don't understand, like, why aren't they mowing the whole lawn? And he said, well, that's not their property. You know, they're only mowing to the property line. And I was like, what? You know, I didn't understand about property ownership. And I never really did after that. I was like, that just seems so weird that you're not allowed to walk on that property because it doesn't belong to you when it's literally attached to yours. I mean, the dividing line is invisible. So I wanted to, and then, you know, okay, so that was coming from me. But then when I was at school, we learned a lot about the Native Americans and their thoughts about property, which are very different. So I just wanted to think about property ownership and land stewardship also, because at the time that Agnes and Polly's great-grandfathers moved on, you know, bought Fellowship Point in the 1870s. It really was right after Thoreau. And it was really the time of Audubon and a lot of the early real conservationists, and they were very involved with that. So Agnes and Polly inherited ideas of that. I guess I knew about that. You know, I think I was just grew up in a place where people thought about such things. And it's going to Maine in the summer. It's a huge subject. It has been since I was a little girl. People have thought a lot about how to preserve land there and the rivers and so on.
Well, the first book that Agnes turned over to Maud was an ode to Maine, right? An ode to fellowship about the love of land and love of nature.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw a lot of comparisons with that book and your book, Fellowship Point, because you do such a wonderful job of describing the land, of the animals, you know, everything that it encompasses. That I don't know about all of you out there, but I wanted to be at Fellowship Point, not just summertime, but, you know, year round, for just to see it, smell it, experience it. How did you immerse us as readers so beautifully and just have us experience it right there with you?
That was my favorite part of working on this book, was being at Fellowship Point. I would just get up in the morning, make coffee, feed the cats, and just sit down, and I would just immerse. I can't even explain it, but I do know Maine very well. So I would just go in, you know, I would just go into my mind and start just write about the shoreline or the fog rolling in or the rocky beach, like that scene when Polly goes and lies down on the rocks the first day she comes back after Dick has died. And, you know, that just was, it's just so vivid to me. I can just smell it. I can feel the wet rock, you know, the cold, wet rocks. And I just loved writing about it so much.
There was a lot of laying down. Did you actually physically do that? I know Polly did it with, you know, and then it was just like, it's almost like give yourself over, your body over to the land and just be one.
I think, yes. I mean, I think I always like to lie on the ground. I don't lie down much in my daily life, I'll tell you. But yeah, if I'm out, you know, in a wild place, I just want the vibe of the earth to come into my body. So.
Was most of this novel written in Maine or somewhere else?
No, some of it was, but most of it was written in New Jersey.
So you're using your memories to get you there.
Yes, I really was, for Philadelphia too, because I grew up outside of Philadelphia and I went to Penn, and my best friend from college days, not the Penn days, before she's on this Zoom, I'm looking at her right now. And she went to Penn also, and to visit, and I saw her there, and yeah, I just really wanted to think about places that I love, because I don't live in Philadelphia now. I love Philadelphia though. And a lot of it is from my memory. I think I didn't want to violate my memory in a way by, making sure everything was exact. I did fact check it, but I also wanted to use these really powerful sensory impressions that I've carried for a long time.
Do you tend to experience with all your senses when you're writing? And is it a visual, more of a hearing? Because it seems like you tap into a lot of them. Not all authors do that, but it seems like you're one of those multisensory writers.
Well, I've taught myself to do that. I think when I started writing, I wrote visually, and I just wrote down what I saw, but I realized that I needed all of the senses to be on the page to make something come alive. I learned that from reading a Flannery O'Connor essay where she said you need 3 senses to make something feel real to the reader. And I took that to heart. So I started really thinking about, I started paying attention when I saw the scene. So what am I hearing now? What am I, what would my character be smelling? What would they be touching? How would that feel? Like that scene when Nan is running through the field, and she's, she grabs the grass, and it kind of burns her hand as she's pulling it. I just, I love thinking about things like that and remember, and that's the kind of thing, like I will go do it just to have like the exact, how long does it take to start burning? I'll just do it to see.
Well, thank you.
I do want to put the senses on the page. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Flannery O'Connor, and thank you, Alice Elliott Dark, for letting us go through that, because you know how you said you could sit at a window and just stare out for 5 hours. That's how I got lost in this book. And just the time just melted away because it was so beautiful. So thank you for experiencing all that for us, because it was fantastic. You also talked about other themes about women's roles in society. And I don't think we've talked about it a little bit because of octogenarian, like their lifespan, but were there certain things that you experienced or certain things of other people experienced that you wanted to get in this? Because women were, it wasn't the best of situations as far as women's rights when they were young girls or teenagers wanting, to live their lives and maybe not even get married.
Well, I went to a girls' school, and I was very aware of the lives of girls and women without having to constantly think about, the male ego all the time. It didn't come into play at school. And I had a lot of teachers who were quite brilliant. They had PhDs from Radcliffe and Bryn Mawr and places like this. They couldn't get a job in a university because women weren't hired in universities at that time to be professors. They could get jobs, but I think it was in the mid 60s when women first got full professorships. So I was exposed to women who didn't, who were so brilliant and educated because they were allowed to get PhDs. They just couldn't get the natural job that comes with a PhD. So I was very aware of situations like this. And just in daily life, I saw a lot of just kind of everyday sexism. And I really was very sensitive to it, I think. So it's part of how I notice the world. I notice sexism, and I wanted to. I did want to write about it, and Agnes wanted to write about it too. When she wrote about the Franklin girls, and it really was about the girls she had known who were so vibrant and full of ideas and ambitions. And then it kind of, by the time they were 25, it was kind of all all melted away, like their big ambitions. And so she wanted to write that series of books, which I wish I had thought of it when I was in my 20s, because I would have loved to write a series of books like that. But she wanted to trace what happens to these women. So yeah, and I wanted to write Maud. I mean, Maud to me was like a different generation of woman.
You said she scared you, right? I mean, at times she unnerved you.
She did. I mean, she's like my students. I mean, my students are, I love them, and I totally respect the fact that they want things now. They don't want to wait till they're 55, to get some interesting project. They want the interesting project now. And, it's a little daunting, I think, for older people sometimes, with how much the younger people think their lives should be amazing and interesting. But I think it's also a good thing.
Have you had any feedback from any of your students? Have any of them read this?
Yes.
And what have they thought?
They've really liked it. I mean, I was surprised. I didn't know who was going to read this book or who it was going to appeal to, but I've had a lot of young people, both male and female, really like it. And a lot of men have liked this book amazingly, which I wasn't sure, just because I thought, yes, it's a book, it's written as a book for everybody. It's just written as sort of a literary book. But I think that when you hear two 80-year-old women, that's like scary stuff for a lot of men.
Well, I remember in my English class in college, we were reading books and, everybody was discussing, and then we started a book with the female perspective, written by a woman, female perspective, and half the room was quiet. The men, the guys and and us females are just talking, just like we always had been. And she said, think of in high school, how many books you read from the female perspective. And we didn't have any. And so it was very interesting. I think men are more used to reading a female voice now, but that hasn't always been the case, right? I mean, for a lot of it, there were some, but not as many, I would say. It was hard for them to put themselves in modern day female head, not, way back, but right now.
Well, that's, it's funny. That's a lot of the comments I've gotten from men. Like one man wrote me a letter and said it was like pulling back the curtain.
Yeah.
To see what women's lives are like. And I was like, wow. Well, I liked that comment. I liked it a lot, but I thought, we know what men's lives are like. Because
yes. You also discuss class in this book. More that it's not directly spoken, but we can see how they live. Why did you choose to make this the upper echelon? Obviously it gave Agnes freedom to do her writing and whatnot, but was there any other reasons as to that choice?
I think it was really that it was sort of a fantasy. It really was. Once these men had bought the point, I wanted that to happen. I wanted a family, I wanted a family or families to have this piece of land. And that just seemed to require people to have enough money to have this piece of land. The idea of having the land came before having the money. But once I started creating those characters, I just was interested in those Philadelphia Quakers. And a lot of those Philadelphia Quakers made fortunes in the 18th and 19th centuries. And so, I don't know. I was not that, but some of my friends were. Some of my friends were from that kind of people. And I always had some kind of envy of them I just thought it seemed secure, to be from a family that had always had money and to have a piece of land. But I also felt like there was something terribly wrong with it too. I was ambivalent about it. So I wanted to explore that.
Well, the Lees obviously grapple with that topic throughout.
Yeah.
Agnes really dives into it, and it's there to ponder, but not necessarily dwell on, I guess, is more my take on it. You also, when you're discussing this book, we talked about you doing everyday conversations, and I'm looking back when I'm thinking about what kinds of questions do I want to ask of what are the big events, and I thought there aren't that many really big events like weddings. Dick, we don't even see his funeral. We don't see Robert's trial. We don't. I started thinking about this. I was like, she has a almost 600-page novel and no huge events that take up chapters and chapters, right? Like, she is so masterful to keep us moving. Why did you choose to not? I mean, the only big party is like your last couple chapters, or when you're talking about that end of summer,
Yeah.
not a reference to it, but we're in the moment. Why?
I knew I wanted to have a big party at the end, because that's just sort of like so many movies end that way, and book, like the party. I wanted to have the party, but I kept having it canceled every year, which I knew it was going to come eventually, but I didn't have all those big set pieces, because I think when I was really studying the work of certain writers, like specifically Edith Wharton, she never has the wedding. It's like the build up to the wedding and then after the honeymoon, and those whole, in book after book, that's skipped. And I just thought, that's really smart, because if you have a wedding, and this is what happens in a lot of movies, if you have a wedding, a wedding just goes a certain way. There's nothing that happens at a wedding. And if something, if you need something to happen, you have to make something to like upset the wedding. Like in 4 weddings and a funeral, something has to happen in the wedding to upset the wedding. And I just didn't want to do that. I wanted to focus more on their daily life, because I didn't want to throw a wrench into a wedding or a funeral to make it a dramatic situation.
Well, this book happened over the table, conversations, walks, into the Saint, or the tea party when we see the woman just lose it crying. It was just a get together of friends in the middle of the day, things that could happen at any time. And I appreciated that, because it gave it even more importance, that's where life really happens, right? That's where we find out who we are, who our friends and family are as well. So it was, I love this. Someone said it gave the freedom of seamless time in their lives rather than specific conflicts, which would come from a gala. It really did. That was a great comment, Sonia. That's my mom, by the way. She's this book.
Where is she?
Can you wave? There she is.
There she is. Thank you for that. I love that.
Okay. The other quote I was questioning, and I'm going to open it up and just so be thinking of your questions. But another quote that happened that she wrote was, all the best books are about form. What is Fellowship Point's form?
Well, I would say it's just the way I set up the book in those different sections, but it really is the form of a 19th century novel, kind of. I mean, it's inspired by that. So I would say that's the form, that it has a certain shape. Like, I made all the chapters pretty much the same length. Those kind of considerations are what I'm thinking about. Because I think all those things
may not have recognized, we may not know that you thought about, that we may not have picked up on that. Like, I did not realize that all the chapters are about the same length. I don't know that.
Yeah.
I picked up.
Yeah. And I think like the overall arc of the book is reflected by those different sections I mentioned of the Quaker discernment process, that there is an arc going forward of something's being decided. It's not just the what's going to happen with the land, but it's also sort of a, how to live, like what really is important, how to live, how to come to the end of a life feeling that life has had value, how to decide who's really important to you in the end.
Another comment came in. It gives a sense of a sturdiness of structure that adds easiness. Well, that sounds beautiful.
Mhm.
All right. I have some rapid fire questions for you. You don't have to think too much on these. Just go quick. People, get your questions ready if you want to. We'll come up with that next. All right. Are you ready, Alice?
Mhm.
All right. Philly or Maine?
Maine.
Cats or dogs?
Cats.
Modern or classic art?
Modern.
Win Nan or the Franklin Girls?
When Nan.
Simply or ornately decorated rooms?
Simply.
Morning glory or night owl?
Morning glory.
Favorite season?
Fall.
Emailing or letter writing?
Letter writing. Yeah, letter writing.
Favorite age, 9 or 81? Or like the perfect?
Well, I mean, 9.
Polly or Agnes?
Agnes.
All right, great job. You can breathe, you can breathe. All right. Anybody have any live questions out there that you want to ask Alice? Please raise your hand. If not, I could keep asking questions till tomorrow. So anybody want to ask anything or make a comment? Please raise your hand. I'll keep asking while you're thinking. All right. I loved, so many of your characters speak to dead family members. Like it's a thing in this book. Why did you decide to go that route? And we'll just stick with that because we have talking to, sisters and husbands and what's your take on that?
I know. I mean, there's so many dead people in this book. It's unbelievable. I think I've thought about death a lot. I had one of my parents died when I was very young. And so I just have had that be part. I mean, it really is such a deep part of my way of thinking about life and thinking that it's important to always be aware that it could end any moment. And I am always aware of that. And I think about that all the time. And I do think, I don't have any theories or beliefs about being in touch with the dead, but I do think that when we're close to people who have died, we do find ourselves having some kind of dialogue with them, however we call it, whether it's we're thinking about memories of them or whether we're thinking about what would that person tell me to do in this situation, just some way of not thinking that the physical death is the end of the relationship, because we're still capable of having a relationship in our thoughts. So I just think that possibly that's in the book because I think about it that way. The idea of Agnes writing the letters to her sister, that just came as an idea, and I loved it because she filters her experiences with Virgil as if she were talking to her sister rather than just talking to herself or writing in a diary. I think she holds back on certain things because Elspeth was so religious and pure. So, you don't really know that unless you kind of stop to think, well, maybe she's having more feelings for Virgil than she's writing specifically. But I thought that, and I thought, well, she's not going to put it a certain way because she's engaging with Elspeth's personality while she's writing these journals.
Polly uses her conversations with Dick to validify her new self, her new change that she's found. And so she utilizes that in a very smart way to, even if she's not conscious of it, to give herself the gumption to do what she wants to do. Whereas I thought when you said, she was, Agnes was writing to her sister, I thought that was a brilliant writer's choice because it allows you to move the narrative where you want the reader to go. Like it's open. I mean, you're writing a letter to someone, you can stop on a dime and change subject and add some new fact in that we can get that maybe we wouldn't if it were a scene, right? Because it's letter writing.
Yes.
It
Yeah.
was very effective, and such a smart decision, I thought, because it seemed very realistic that she would do something like that, and it gave the reader so much more background. So
Thank you. I love that. I mean, I could have written 1,000 pages of that. It was really fun to write.
it was good. All right, we do have a question. Mary Ellen, I'm going to add you to the spotlight. She has a nice scene. So go ahead, Mary Ellen. Ask your
I do,
question.
and I'm so sorry I'm not on here.
No
Every
worries.
time you try to use my camera, I come in at the top upside down. And so I don't know why, and until I get that fixed, I'm just not going to hang out upside down. This is actually Lake Superior, where I was camping when I read your book. And
Oh,
it was the
perfect.
perfect place. If I couldn't be
Yeah.
in Maine, the mood was great, and I so loved it. So I wanted to thank you for writing the book. And I was wondering, besides Edith Wharton, what other authors have been mentors or role models or influenced your writing?
Scott Fitzgerald, definitely. I would say, oh, there's so many. Middlemarch, George Eliot, Tolstoy, Flannery O'Connor, James Baldwin, Flaubert, definitely Madame Bovary. I've read it a bunch of times. I don't know, I could go on, but that's a good sampling.
Yeah, boy, nice cross section.
Great question, Mary Ellen. Thanks for asking.
Sure. Thank you so much, Alice.
You're welcome.
There were a lot of books mentioned in this book. So, whether it's on a bookshelf, someone's picking it up to read, someone's referencing it. How did you decide? I mean, there's so many books out there. How do you decide, oh, I'm going to put this book, this title in Fellowship Point?
Some of the books were books that I cared about, but some of them were books that I saw, I've seen in people's houses, people like them.
Mm-hmm.
Would have certain books, like my grandparents, for example, who they're not exactly like these people, but they lived in the same part of the world outside of Philadelphia. They would have like a full set of Guy de Maupassant or a full set of Mark Twain, on the bookshelf. So I tried to reflect some of that, the kind of books that people used to have. I mean, people used to have these sets. Some of you might remember that. People don't have these sets anymore, but I wanted to have things like that. And they have in Agnes's house, Leeward Cottage, they have a big collection of Maine books. And I definitely see that when I go to Maine. People have had these houses that have been in the family for a long time. There's tons of really great Maine books that you can't get anywhere anymore.
Great answer. Tracy, I'm going to spotlight you, and she has a question. Go ahead.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfectly. Yes.
Okay. I don't know if this is a question so much as a comment, but one of my favorite quotes from the book was where you write, Eve was smarter than Adam. What if God had applauded her curiosity and ordered the world accordingly? And or was the Bible's authors who altered the truth to the consolidation of male power? And I just really can't stop thinking about that, and how I would love to see a book like that, like a book based on what if God did applaud Eve's curiosity and ordered the world accordingly, and how different things would have gone if it hadn't been men who were in charge of what went in the Bible and what was told and what stories got to be told. And it really reminded me of the musical The Children of Eden by Stephen Schwartz. Have you seen that?
I don't know that. No.
Oh, it's fantastic. And it's kind of in the beginning based on Eve being full of questions and wanting, not being like just this person who was duped, but but just very, had a lot of questions and was very intelligent. And so I just really, really like that. And I'm not ever going to write a book, but if
I was
anyone
going to
does.
say, why don't you write that book? I think it's a great idea. I'm not kidding. When we get off this call, I'm going to write that idea down. If I ever do it, I'll give you credit. I love that idea.
Yeah, I would love to. Might be kind of dystopian. I don't know, but I think that would be fantastic, and I would
Yeah,
buy it in a heartbeat.
I agree.
How wonderful, Tracy. Thanks so much for suggesting that. You do mention another, Maud finds out about this kind of hidden books by Agnes, the, letters in the name. Have you found any gems like that maybe you didn't even realize was part of your story in Fellowship Point? Has anything popped up that you thought, oh, that was in the back of my mind, but I didn't even realize it when it happened?
You mean in my life or in the book?
Either way. So like, that's like, she wrote, all the characters' names, AGS, right?
Yes.
That's how she solved it. And Agnes says, I didn't even know I was doing that, and I was just wondering if anything has come up in your writing career where you wrote it, not even realizing, and someone pointed it out later, if that's ever happened to you.
Yes, a lot of times. I mean, I think, writing a book like this, that's so long, I put in a lot of things that they represent something important to me, but I don't always know what it is. And sometimes people will point it out to me. I can't think of any specific examples right now, but I'm trying to think of something that someone said about, I can't remember. I'm sorry. I don't want to.
No worries.
Remember, but yes, it does happen. Another thing that happens, it's really strange, is because you're putting so much psychic energy into writing a book, like a lot of your energy and emotions, things happen that you write, you make them up and then they happen. That happens very often. When I talk to my writer friends, it's like, it's almost like you're casting a spell and then these things happen. So I'm aware of that. So I'm careful when there's certain things I start like making happen and I'm like, no, I don't even want to do that because I don't want it to happen.
Well, do you think Agnes's memoir happens?
Do I think it happens?
Like she's writing it and she's still considering it and going back and forth with Maud. If this continues out in your world, do you think Agnes?
Yes, I think she writes I think she ends up writing the real story that Maud wanted her to write to begin with, because her relationship with Maud really is a relationship that changes her. Maud pushes her. And when she is able to share those notebooks with Polly, and Polly allows her to feel like, well, maybe I don't have to feel guilty about Virgil's death. Maybe it really was an accident. And once she shared her feeling of guilt with one person, she's able to start just talking more about her life and things that she's kept to herself all along. I mean, it's kind of poignant to get to that when you're 80, but I think, things happen as you get older, like relationships get repaired and things, different perspectives come in. And I do think that happened. And I do think she went ahead and wrote that book.
Well, I love that Agnes said that, that Maud was the person she didn't know she needed. And really that was the linchpin, right? Like that's the thing that we didn't even know it was coming. And I love that subplot because it was just so beautiful. I loved it.
Thank
Someone did ask what you were reading right now. Let's see who that was. They wanted to know what you're currently reading. Allison did. And I would like to know just what books you would recommend.
Well, I'm mostly reading for work right now, which means I'm reading the Neapolitan novels by Elena Ferrante. I've taught it. This is the third time I've taught it, but this is graduate students. So I can teach all four in one semester. With the undergrads, I can't teach all four books. It's too much. but I'm so immersed in those books and obsessed with those books. And I have a Substack, and I've been writing on the Substack about her book, about this book. Let me see if I can hold it up. This book, which is called In the Margins. Wait,
Get it closer. There we go. Yeah.
This is about her writing and how she came to write those books, and it's just so brilliant. But I also and I'm reading a lot of my students' work, so that's a lot of what I'm reading right now. If I stopped blurring, you would see I probably have 200 or 300 books behind me just stacked up that are my to read pile, my TBR. And I hope to get to some of it this summer. But books that I've read recently, and a lot of the books I've read recently have been for blurbs, but I've read some amazing books. One of them that just came out is called Beyond That, the Sea by Laura Spence Ash, which is a gorgeous, gorgeous book. She was a student of mine, and I loved it so much. And then one that's coming out this month is called In the Orchard by Eliza Minot, also a student of mine. Really beautiful book about a young mother, and just it's about motherhood, but it's so sensual and so deep. It only takes place in like half a day, but you're so immersed in her feelings about being a mother and the sensual reality of being with children. It's just absolutely beautiful. And Commitment by Mona Simpson, I just read, which I love Mona Simpson, and I just thought that was such a beautiful, excellent book. Take What You Need by Idra Novi. I just did an interview with her, and that book, it's about a woman sculptor, metal sculptor living in Western Pennsylvania, a small town that's really lost its sources of income. So people have come onto hard times, but this woman grew up there and she stayed there, and she makes these big metal sculptures. And then her stepdaughter is the other character in the book. It's really a fascinating and a good book.
Well,
So
thank
those are
you for adding to our TBR, and especially sharing what your students have been writing. I love that you're supporting their writing as well. Are you, because you mentioned that you're going to a writing workshop coming up. So are you currently working on something, anything that you can share with us at all? Or are you not to that
I
point?
am working on a book. I wrote a short story a while back called In the Gloaming, which was about a young man who goes home, who he has AIDS, and he goes home to die. And I just never quite stopped thinking about those characters. So I'm writing a novel about the characters and what happens to his family and friends after his death. Like, how do they, again, death, how do they live without him, really? I mean, it's as simple as that.
How does life go on? Will those be short stories as well, or will it be?
No, it's a novel. It's a
Okay.
novel. Mhm.
Well, excellent. We hope to get our hands on that when you're ready. But this has
It's
been
not gonna-
absolutely a delight. I just thank you so much, Alice, for joining us. Thank you, readers out there. It's just I've just loved this entire time. Please make sure and check out her website. Follow her on Instagram for the latest news. I'd appreciate it if you'd follow me, the LB the Lover of Books, either on Instagram or Facebook. And then also LB the Lover of Books on YouTube. This will be recorded and put up there. So if you had to step away for a minute, you can watch the rest of it when you have time. Again, check out for more reviews, recommendations. On Sunday, April 2nd at, I'm sorry, that's now, April 16th at 3 p.m. I'm going to be shifting gears, and I'm hosting Zulfa Katu, or Katani, to find out how she pronounces her last name, to discuss a book of the month, YA novel, this one right here, called As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow. It's a love letter to Syria and its people. It's a speculative novel set amid the Syrian revolution, burning with the fires of hope, love, and possibility. It's perfect for the fans of The Book Thief and The Salt to the Sea. She has racked up so many Best Book of the Year awards on this. I can't even list them, or we'd be here for quite some time. C.Y. Sabas Tahir, #1 New York Times bestseller, author of An Ember in the Ashes and All My Rage, says, it's a searing story of war, loss, family, and love, of seeking grace in madness and hope in tragedy. As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow is a phenomenal tale of piercing keen for the Syria that was and the Syria that is, an absolute must read. So I hope you have a chance to read that and join us in a couple of weeks to speak with her. It's a little bit early because she lives in Switzerland. So that should open up a little bit more of the time zones. If you know of an author that would like to chat, please let me know. Again, subscribe to my YouTube channel and check out past chats. And Alice, you are just a delight. You're a favorite. And thank you, readers, for joining us. Any last words? You're just so awesome.
I'm just so grateful. I thought your questions were brilliant. I mean, you're an amazing reader, and thank you so much for doing this. And thank you so much to everybody for coming. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate your time. Everybody have a wonderful Sunday evening, and I'll see you next time on the LB Lover of Author Chats. Bye, everybody.
Bye, LB.